Okay. All right, I think we are all set and ready to go. So this is going to be today's live stream here. As always, we try to start this a couple minutes early, and it's July 15th. So if you're watching this and it's a couple days later, that's okay. You can still watch the show, but I'm not going to be able to answer any questions live. If you do have questions and you want me to answer them, well, we have the show today, and during this live stream, please make sure you put your comments either, depending on what type of computer or on your phone or however you're watching this, either down below or on the side, and you can type your questions in down below. The only thing I'm asking people to do is that if they do have it, like this question, you see it right here on the screen, just try to put the @ we the governed so that it stands out from kind of some of the background noise, and I'm actually able to see exactly what's going on and what you're actually, it's easier for me to actually pick the questions out from just commentary that might be going on back and forth. So the other thing I was going to mention, just to start out the program with here, because I know I've promised I would do this in the past, and I try to do this at most of the shows. Last night I actually had the Lewis County Doge trading class over in Chehalis, and then I have another Doge trading class up in Clallam County, up in Sequim this Thursday, which if you don't live in Clallam County or maybe Jefferson County, it's not going to be that close to you, but if you do live up in that area, I'm looking forward to seeing you there. And the information is on my We the Governed website. You can go there to look and actually see the details on that Doge training class, Doge Washington training class. There are a lot of things going on right now simultaneously across the state. So we have a number of topics to try to get to today, and I know the theme of it, why does our government hurt us so much, is we can talk about some of those topics as you try to assign a general theme for a live stream. But obviously, it's based really on the questions that you ask. I'll do my best to answer them, and you're just going to have to type them in so that I can see them, kind of like this down below. And when I'm attempting to answer a question, depending on how far astray I get from the original question that's asked, I will keep it posted down below as long as I'm trying to answer that question. So I realize there's a lot going on, and this is kind of that beautiful time of year in Washington State, especially if you live in Western Washington, where we don't have the liquid sunshine that we usually have, and it's actually a sunny and beautiful day out. So sometimes I'm amazed that people are watching the live stream on such a good and beautiful day today when there's probably a lot of things you'd rather be doing outdoors, or that you could be doing outdoors. But if you decide to enjoy air conditioning, or at least to get in the shade, and you want to watch today's live stream, I'm looking forward to getting some of your questions and getting those from you and hearing what you have to say. The one thing I was going to mention just real quick is that there is some updates that I had just based on one of the videos I did last week, which is the video about Bob Ferguson and the Office of Financial Management and the fact that they weren't updating the checkbook, which is one of the resources that I refer many people who take the Doge Washington training classes and anybody else who actually cares about transparency in government. And I do encourage them to use that as a resource to kind of start doing your own research into exactly how government squanders your taxpayer dollars. And they hadn't updated since April when I started to do, which is shortly after we had started posting a lot of stories on some of the frivolous and wasteful and expenditures in the state of Washington. And then conveniently it kind of stopped and it wasn't being updated anymore. Shortly after I did that video, the Office of Financial Management actually did start updating their state checkbook again. And I'm sure that's in part due to the fact that Ari Hoffman did this whole story on it. There were a number of people that were calling them and exposing the fact that they hadn't been updating it. And so they then updated April, May. That's right, it hadn't been updated since March, I think, and then they updated to April and May. And I believe they're about ready to post up June data. So it was just good to see the response for, just to see them respond to the fact that they were getting a little bit of attention for their incompetence and failure to actually, I see the laptop failing there. Just their incompetence and their failure to actually provide any kind of transparency on their expenditures, partially because who can blame them? There's probably a lot of embarrassing things and pointlessly wasteful things that Washington state government does squander our taxpayer dollars on. And that should be no surprise, because over the last 10 years, we've had state government increase its budget by 116%, despite the fact that inflation over that same period of time only went up 35%. And 35% inflation in 10 years is actually a big inflation number. That's actually a big deal. But and that is the theoretical inflation numbers. But to have government increase by 116%, and nobody who's remotely sane actually thinks that Washington state government is any better 10 years later than it was 10 years ago. It's only gotten worse with the more money that we give them, which is actually really the story of generally government today. The more money you give them, the worse things become. The more they promise to solve your problems, the worse those problems become. And the demand to get more money so that they can make the problem even worse in the future usually becomes the terrible cycle that gets repeated over and over again. And you have to break the cycle by just not giving them that much money. So I think that that's a pretty important issue. A couple of significant topics that also really haven't been addressed on this channel at all, although you're dealing with it with a number of other people around Washington state. One is this absurd case out of Island County where the prosecutor Banks up there, who's just he's a raving lunatic. I know anybody's ever paid any attention to his social media feed. He's hyper partisan, super extreme leftist. He's continually posted. This goes back many, many years. I mean, I think we were talking about this shortly after the guy was elected long ago. He just seems to use a social media account as a perpetual and endless attack feed on Republicans in a really unusual way. I mean, most elected officials, it doesn't really matter what party they're in, when they get elected, they usually at least moderate some of the more extreme viewpoints they may very well have in private, but they usually aren't dumb enough to post their extreme, especially kind of hateful screeds and stuff. They don't tend to post that on social media, but that's not true with the prosecutor in Island County. He does it all the time. He's been doing it for years. And the 2024 election this last year, when they still, for some bizarre and weird reason, and a dysfunctional, illogical, and totally irrational, hostile to science reason, the Island County auditor, who claims to be a Republican, had a weird mask mandate for this one little section of the area where if you were going to be an election observer, you would go there. And Tim Haslow was a election observer with the Republican Party, and he did not want to wear a mask. And he was arguing that the mask requirement there was illegal. And you could see from some of the videos, too, that even the employees who worked there weren't wearing the masks. But, of course, equal treatment under the law doesn't exist generally in most places in Washington state. And it's been hyper-partisan given every chance you get. And when you got a crazy, insane leftist like Banks, the prosecutor Banks up there, you're never going to get an honest result in the election process, certainly not any kind of blind justice. And then the crazy judge that they had up there simply they went down this road and they gave him a felony for for not following an irrational, illogical, and dishonest mask mandate that has nothing to do with science, for an election observer who legally and very clearly could be there. And you can see the video. The whole thing was recorded. It's very easy to see that he didn't do anything extreme. We're not talking Antifa here, where violence is their middle name and assaulting people is all they do. We're just talking about a regular guy clearly showing that he disagreed with that policy, and he did leave the room, but charging him with a felony was an extreme abuse of prosecutorial discretion. But a good example that you just can't trust leftists in any position of government, because if you let them get in charge and and they get in there, they cannot help but simply abuse their position in government every single time I've ever seen them get in. That was just another example. The judge obviously is another case as well, who clearly the judge not allowing exculpatory evidence that clearly would have been beneficial to Tim, or in that case, it's particularly ridiculous. So regardless, I think that's a big story, and I also think it's a bigger story moving forward. I realize that there's an appeal process. It's very unfortunate for the judiciary that we have in Washington, as corrupted as they are, as hyper-partisan as they are, and they've become as shockingly deferential as they've also become to to government, especially when it comes to your freedoms and liberties. A lot of things are being exposed in a case like this. To some extent, he's done a tremendous benefit to those of us who care about liberty and freedom by highlighting the absurd double standard that does exist in our state that very few people really get to expose at such an obvious level. Sort of related to this, of course, is just the way the Attorney General, especially under Bob Ferguson, weaponized the Attorney General's office in a very hyper-partisan, non-honest way, and going after Tim Eyman the way they did. And I've written many articles about it in the past. If you can go back and type in Tim Eyman's name on my website, you'll see a lot of these articles I've written, a lot of videos that I've done about him in the past as well. Highlighting very specific things that I was aware of or that I had tracked at the time. And using a campaign finance case as the basis for destroying his life and imposing a $5.8 million fine on him is truly ridiculous, and nothing in the history of the state of Washington or any other state in America that I'm aware of today actually equals that level of state abuse of somebody that in a very partisan way. And it is a little surprising to me that the weaponization of the legal system in Washington state hasn't attracted more attention. It hasn't been weaponized so often, I guess, and so widespread that they've been able to get the federal attention that the state probably deserves. But it does seem to be an inevitable trend line that eventually we're going to get a situation in which it's going to become inarguably so absurd that a lot more people around the country are going to become aware of it. And partially, I guess that's the job of people like me and others to start to expose just how corrupt and dishonest the legal system is when the very same prosecutors, like this Island County prosecutor, who's happy to let violent felons go every day of his job, decides to direct all the resources of his office to go after a political crime at worst, and throw all his resources to attack somebody that he's openly not liked in the first place, and then to have a judge corrupt enough to basically conceal that exculpatory evidence from the trial is truly an amazing situation. Those jurors in Island County should be ashamed of themselves, but to be fair, a lot of times these jurors also get a lot of misleading and dishonest direction from the judge, and certainly misleading information and dishonest information from the prosecutor as well. And, that makes the legal defense very difficult if all this evidence is excluded by the judge and you're not able to present it at trial. So, but we'll see. I mean, this is the case, one of these cases that could actually go somewhere quite significantly as the appeal and some of its other processes move forward. I do hope to do a little bit more thorough job talking about that case. I do think Brandy Cruz did an excellent job covering it, but it's been covered by a number of other people in the state of Washington as well. And I think there's some attention that they're getting there as well. The other thing that does seem to be generating a lot more attention when we look around the state is the sending the ferries over to Florida, having Florida build Washington State ferries instead of any businesses locally in Washington State. There is a long history, or at least there was a long history, of building ships in Puget Sound. I mean, I had many grandparents that had worked in the shipyards in Puget Sound, and there had already been a long storied history about that in the past. It's not surprised, considering the nature of Puget Sound as really one of the great deep water ports in North America. And to have at least according to the shipbuilders that would be bidding on that and that did bid on it, certainly the one that was the last one, I think, bidding still on that, the ability to build one of the ferries, to have the cost of their ability to build those ferries so much higher than the Florida option, so much higher that it was worth going to Florida. And so Bob Ferguson becomes Florida man by deciding to go down there and build them there. It was interesting. There was some follow-up conversation that's been out there about how ridiculous the overall cost per ferry is, and how the between B&O tax, forced DEI agenda issues, required minimum 58-hour minimum wage assigned to the ferry production process as part of Washington State's requirements, and all these other cascade of bureaucratic stupidity and incompetence piles on top of the business, pushing up the cost to the point where it's cheaper, apparently, to go get the ferry built in Florida. And I'm not sure how they bring the ferries from Florida to Washington when they build them. I am presuming that there's some kind of a dry dock ship that brings them around. you can't just throw that on a truck and carry it across the country. You're not going to carry it across the country in pieces and reassemble it in Washington, and you're not going to fly it here. So the only thing I can think of is you have to bring it through the Panama Canal in some fashion. If anybody actually knows how they bring the big ferry like that they would make in Florida to Washington, I'd be curious to see your comments down below, because I don't have that answer for sure, but it's a question that I've had about how they deliver the ferries here. But to imagine that you can build it in Florida, theoretically with the same level of quality that you were supposed to be able to build it out here, and then ship it all the way through the Panama Canal to come to Washington and have it still be that much cheaper than building it in Washington State. It is a fascinating expose of the deficiencies that have been imposed and created for the businesses that exist here, and not exactly a very positive statement of what they're doing. So anyway, we can jump into that or any other stories. Let's get into it. You guys have asked a number of questions here, and I want to start getting to them, because as I've learned in the past, if I don't get to your questions pretty quickly, what happens is I start to run behind, and then I am not able to catch up to your questions, and I can see the number of viewers starting to go up. So let's just jump into our live stream today, and the first question of the day is from Jack Palder. And the answer to your question has to be because they are bound to be evil. If you acted like the government to people that you don't even know, you would probably end up in prison. And of course, that's answering the main primary question that I had on today's live stream: why does our government hurt us so much? And oftentimes when we're talking about this, I am reminded, and I know I say this all the time, but Thomas Sowell's quote about government, right? The only way to understand government bureaucracy is to recognize that outcomes mean nothing, but the process is everything. And when he says the process, he's really referring to oftentimes both protecting the narrative and the agenda that the bureaucracy creates as their own day-to-day workflow. The fact that Washington State Auditor doesn't really care about catching fraud or preventing fraud in Washington State, they just care about going along and giving everybody a gold star who they come and visit, and they do a fake audit and give them a gold star, you're a winner, and move on to the next entity because they have to get through 100 people or 100 entities a month or whatever their minimum number is. The fact that they pre-negotiate what they're going to look at when they come out to look at a jurisdiction and supposedly do a fake audit of that government and how they're running their finances or abusing them. Doesn't mean everybody that works at the auditor's office is corrupt or incompetent. I find the fraud investigation team there to be pretty good, but the overall analysis of the state auditor's office is exceptionally deficient and not doing a job that we would expect it to do. We should not be calling it the auditor's office because they don't really audit anything. That being said, there's other problems that you see more likely, and anytime you run into government, you see the Department of Ecology not caring at all about whether the environment's cleaner today than it was yesterday. And this was most evidence to me when I would go in and look down in the lobby back before they locked it so nobody could come in and actually visit. And the only chart that they had up in the lobby of the Department of Ecology, it wasn't about how much cleaner the water is or the air or any other improvements that supposedly an agency like that is tasked with making. But the fact that the only graph that actually exists in the lobby of the Department of Ecology is a graph that only shows the size of government and how much they've been able to grow their agency over the previous number of years. It was the only thing. And I just remember thinking how funny that was. I used to take photos of it every time I would go in there, just because it just so exemplified what the priority of the Department of Ecology is. They don't care about clean air or water or anything else. All they care about is bloating the bureaucracy and growing themselves bigger and bigger moving forward. That is all they care about. Top to bottom, almost universal, they don't care about anything else. Fish and Wildlife doesn't care about protecting the fish. They just want one or two fish to still be alive, but they'd rather not save any animal, because if they do, then the reason for existence starts to disappear, and if they solve the problem, their job potentially goes away. So there's a lot more money to be made and a lot more job security to have if you basically don't solve the problem. Let's jump into the next question here, which is from Brian B. What's the latest with Tim Eyman's fight for the Parental Rights Initiative? Well, I'm not aware of anything going on with that particular... Oh, are you talking to Tim Eyman's? Okay. I'm not familiar with anything going on with Tim Eyman's initiative. I believe that he got a ballot title, and I don't know that anything's actually happening with it, so I don't have an update. That's just something I don't know anything about. Sorry, and wish I did. I'll have to ask him next time I chat with him. Jason Fisher, happy Tuesday, Glenn. What did you make of the Kohlberger plea deal, and did the prosecutor sabotage it to stop the death penalty? Okay, so this is an interesting question, and for those of you who've been living under a rock and aren't aware of it, what we're really talking about with the Kohlberger plea deal is the Washington State University student who decided that it was a good idea to go into Idaho and invade, basically home invasion of a student housing place where some of these kids were renting, students at University of Idaho were renting just barely off-campus room. And it's really a series of rooms that they were renting in this house, and going in and murdering 4 of them. And it was a shocking crime, obviously, and not one that people would expect to hear about. So, of course, it gets a lot of attention. And the way he was caught has also gotten a lot of attention. And the fact that he actually had a pretty vigorous and aggressive defense, that if you had read any of the many articles, and there's just hundreds of them that have been written out there, the presumption was that he was going to have this really tough defense. And although he was having setbacks, there was a lot of circumstantial evidence that they were using in that case, and it looked pretty solid. But at the same time, it looked, you were relying on a limited set of DNA. There were other things that probably were, the one gal that saw him in the house, he was wearing a mask and bushy eyebrows. It was probably not enough to totally identify him. And so there was a lot of stuff kind of all tied into that case. And most people, it was very clear the prosecutor's office in Idaho was going to continue to stick to this death penalty case that they clearly had. And Kohlberger's defense team obviously did everything they could to try to remove the death penalty as an option in for this case, and the prosecutor's office stuck to their guns on that. And then suddenly, over recent weekends, it's been a couple weekends ago, at least according to the family members of the victims of his murder, he decided to plea, provided that the death penalty was taken off. So he pled to first-degree murder of all 4 of those kids, or students, and then home invasion. He pled guilty to that as well, and he also waived his right to appeal. And many of those victims felt betrayed. Many of the victims' families, I should say, felt betrayed, and felt like it was taking that the prosecutor wimped out on this case when they could have held out and gotten the death penalty for Kohlberger. And on the practical side of things, I would presume that the assessment that the prosecutor's office has in that case is that obviously they save a lot of time and appeals and other drama that surround death penalty cases and have surrounded those in the past. And even high-profile cases like this. And they felt that having a plea bargain in hand is a known outcome for sequential life sentences plus some additional years. In theory, if you could trust the people who run the Department of Corrections and future judges in that state, then he'll be in prison for life. But the big question, of course, has become, can you trust them? Or are they more likely to release violent criminals in the future, which has been the trend line that a lot of states, including conservative states, have been on over the years. And an interest, instead of having, this goes back to criminal justice reform issues that I've had discussions about in the past. Clearly, if you paid attention to government, we have over-criminalized large swaths of society. There's whole books that have been written about how most of you commit, including myself, probably 3 to 4 federal crimes and felonies a day, usually without even knowing it. Dumb, inane, oddball, weird things that our government's classified as felonies. Stepping on a flower, going the wrong... there's all kinds of different things. There's many books that have been written about this. And instead of looking at criminal justice reform being, let's eliminate crimes against bureaucracy and focus on the crimes against people that actually create victims and cause harm, this tendency to shift into this mode where the bureaucracy loves to create and invent new crimes all the time, wearing a mask as an observer in elections in Island County, like I just talked about. That's the type of crime that every Democrat in Washington State really likes, but they don't want it to be a crime for you to go out and murder people on the streets of Tacoma. So this balancing problem is really significant. And in this case, I don't know what the right decision was in this, whether for the prosecutor, whether they should have accepted this or not. It probably felt like a real safe outcome. One of the biggest problems for victims, really, and victims' families, is that as much as the people in the prosecutor's office are trying to do the right thing, and they, in theory, are supposed to be working to have justice served of some version of justice, even though it's not going to bring the victims back or make them whole, there is a tendency to forget that these people, this is their day-to-day job, 9 to 5, that's what they're doing, or it's late hours too sometimes, and they get burned out and they decide that it's a lot of work and they'd rather take the easy street out of and call it a win and rack it up as a win and then move on to the next crime, because it's not like criminals just stop committing crimes because there's a bunch of cases there. So my presumption is that inevitably you're always fighting this inertia of the attorneys in this case, or the legal system, where they're going to want to have a win and move on. And it's one of the problems that we have currently, where these cases just drag out for years and years and years. And so I am sure that the prosecutor's office feels like this is a win, that they got this guy behind bars for life. He admitted that guilt, there's no doubt about it. He's not going to be able to kind of weasel his way out of it through some arcane decision in the courtroom, and they don't have to worry about an odd flyer in a hung jury or something like that in the future. Totally relate to the family of the victims and feeling like justice was not served. Obviously, Kohlberger gets to live his life in comfort while their children are dead, and that is a horrific outcome. True justice doesn't really exist on this planet, maybe in another life, right? So you're never really going to find that true justice. But at least the guy's behind jail, or in jail in theory, and we'll see how things go. Thunder, the next question here, Thunder Designer, you keep changing your name. Hello again, Glenn. Have you seen news that many fires are spreading across the U.S., like the states in the West Coast, like California? And your thoughts on the flash flooding in Texas. Obviously, natural disasters have been with us for a long time. Only people who have never studied history or paid any attention to what's been going on think it's suddenly a new thing or new phenomena. However, there's a lot of government programs and approaches to things that do make it worse, of course, particularly when it comes to wildfires. One of the issues and challenges that we do have with the current wildfire scene, and at least the ones we've been seeing in Washington, is that a lot of these fires appear to be arson or human related, like people are going out and starting them. Even where I live in South Thurston County off of Exit 88, we had a number of arson fires that were started there around July 4th. Still a little too wet in our area for the fires to get too far, and the fire department got out and put them out pretty quickly. But the willful arson fire could be a little bit new phenomena, and it's hard to detach it from the concern that many people have, especially when you have political elements that believe that destroying Western society and destroying America is a good idea. Wildfires are a pretty low-cost way of causing great harm and damage and destruction. And watching out for arsonists is probably going to be a fairly significant issue during a dry season coming up. We've had a reasonably wet start to the year in Western Washington, but Eastern Washington's been a little more susceptible to a number of fires, and there's been a variety of evacuations. They haven't been as big as some of the fires in the past, but we've definitely seen a number of them around Spokane, Lincoln County, and a number of other places back there. We've had some out by Lake Cushman in Western Washington and a few other places, but nothing really, really big yet. And when I see these fires and arson-related fires in other states around the country, that's obviously more concerning. You can't do anything about the lightning coming in, starting a fire, or there's legitimate accidents that do happen that'll start fires too. But when you're having people go out there and purposely set those fires off, that's a problem. I don't have a lot of thoughts on the flash flooding in Texas, other than being astounded at how fast the river, increased there. I used to be a whitewater kayaker, and so one of the great things about having a sport like that you do for many years, and you get a chance to go into a lot of. I didn't do like class 6 or really high level whitewater rafting, or kayaking, but I would go into class 4 and class. That was really what I liked to do, and spent a bit of time in the river. But you really begin to appreciate the significance of the hydraulics of a river, and I used to skydive as well. And I can tell you that, and paraglide and other things, whitewater kayaking was oftentimes, I would have the scariest moments was in whitewater rafting, just because of the massive hydraulic force of a river, and you can't appreciate it unless you've experienced it enough to really understand what that eddy line really can do, and the reversals behind obstacles and other things like that you'll experience in the river and become quite familiar with if you spend any time in there doing anything around swift water. But having that level of river increase is really unheard of. I mean, I've been there when they've done the releases off the Tieton. Those are controlled releases. They only do so much, right? And they're only going to raise that river so much. And they can lower it pretty quickly, too. And you can see I actually recovered a paddle on the Tieton because they lowered it enough that I actually was able to go downstream and find it later. But, you have a massive impact like that. And very few people, unless they've spent time around swift water at any significant level, they don't really fully appreciate how dangerous that water really is. And having kids like that in a camp right next to the water, that's obviously even more heartbreaking, because normally you would think that even if there was a massive flood coming, that you would have enough time as the floodwaters increase, that you would be able to get people out of the path of danger. But have them increase so quickly at night like that, many people can imagine that they'd be there in some kind of scenario where they would be able to avoid it, but I just think it's pretty tragic. And obviously, you just had another situation, I think, in New Jersey and even New York, where you had all these flash floods that are happening over there. By the way, these things have happened a lot in the past. I know people want to look at weather events as something new and unique and politically motivated, but I don't think that that's probably true. It's just it's a good thing to think of the most extreme situations you can have when you live along a body of water like a river. And, it's not hard to run the math on how much water can potentially flow down through that river based on the watershed that it's pulling water from. And if you suddenly have a massive amount of water and you do the calculations, it's kind of surprising sometimes in the cubic feet per minute that can come down that specific watershed. One reason why I don't have a house anywhere near a river, I do, it's way substantially higher. I think I'm 220 feet above the creek near me. So even if there was the world's greatest flood in the history of man, pretty sure that I'd be relatively safe from that. But I've always been kind of paranoid about that, being near a creek or a river or being anywhere near where they could potentially flood. But flooding happens, and it definitely is. But the amount that you saw that creek rise there, that was really significant there. Let's see. Evergreen 101, of course, the attorney's job was to get the death penalty off. She knew he was guilty. She tried everything and ended up getting the death penalty off, in my opinion. And that's probably true. That's actually a really good comment. I'm glad you made that. That's not a question, but for the Kohlberger case, that's a good point to make. I would agree that that's probably, that attorney was probably feeling like his guilty plea was the best outcome she was going to be able to get for him. Again, that doesn't really help the victims of the crime, the victims' families, and it certainly isn't justice, but it's better than nothing, and but it's still not a good situation, I don't think. Graphics Guru, evening Glenn, did you hear that Trump is expecting to release the Epstein documents, and do you have any thoughts on this? So this is one of those scandals where listen, there's no way that I'm going to buy the fact that Epstein killed himself. I'm sorry, I don't buy it. The ridiculous and absurd series of stupid consequences that all lined up behind this guy who clearly, and to believe that he was doing all of the things that he was doing without some kind of reason to blackmail or with these super wealthy, very connected billionaires and people, the prince from England, and Bill Gates and Bill Clinton and the prime minister of Israel and all these other people that he's obviously been attempting to lure into his little universe, it is insane to think that that guy wasn't doing that so that he could leverage those relationships. The biggest challenge you have with somebody who basically exists as a pedophile and a sex trafficker and a blackmailer and somebody trying to do really really become, I mean, just an evil person like this, and it's impossible to look at this guy and not think that that's who he is. And beyond the sweetheart conviction deal, which that's the kind of scam and payoff kickback thing you'd expect from somebody like that, the one that he got in 2008 down in Florida. But remember, even when that one was issued, I can't remember the name of the guy, but the guy there mentioned that he was told to back off because Epstein was involved in intelligence with some of the intelligence agencies. And why would he not be? When you have somebody like that potentially blackmailing major decision makers and influencers and financiers and politicians and people that have a lot of power, it's very self-evident and obvious that you can leverage that information, even if you're an intelligence agency, by being able to get that information from him. And he would gain a lot of protection and benefit by being able to trade that information with those intelligence agencies as well. So everybody who looks at this, who's got any experience in the world at all, knows there is something super shady and dishonest and weird around this guy. And it's also the narcissistic personality disorder that he clearly exhibited, to me, makes it almost impossible to imagine that guy committing suicide unless he really was facing the abyss and there were no longer any options out. And remember, he still had an appeal coming up. He still had a fairly good argument over this non-prosecutorial decision that had been made in his previous ridiculous case out of 2008. He really, and my concern is that whatever records were there have either been shifted and handed over to intelligence agencies and they're just trying to bury the fact that they exist, or that they've been destroyed, or as thoroughly destroyed as people can, or that somebody else has them and they're using them for leverage for their own purposes now, which could be the case. It's a real house of mirrors. It's also incredibly ridiculous to think that there's nothing more to see there. It may not be like the highest priority in life to focus on, but I'm just telling you, I do not like giving a free pass in a situation like this, because here's the other thing too. You have a guy that's doing this, and he's clearly blackmail and has good blackmail evidence probably on pedophiles or other people doing negative and bad things, whatever it might be. I don't think it's just limited to pedophilic sort of behavior. But he probably also knows that he gets this additional benefit by just being this groupie. If you see his behavior, he clearly was trying to weasel his way into everybody's network that exists, that's anybody at every level, in science, in academia, in politics, in business, all this stuff, internationally as well as in our country. But it's also clear that many of these people didn't go down the road with him into doing bad things. I imagine when you're in that level, you're going to go to parties or events and activities, social functions, and you can't control who's going to be around you. And if you've ever been in situations, there's tons of people that will come up and photobomb you around you. They'll want to get a photo and stuff, and your ability to control who's around you at all times, unless you got Secret Service protection holding them back, is pretty unlikely and unrealistic. And so the reality is people can get photos with you in those situations. And so it also appears that there was some kind of effort to go after Dershowitz, for example, who maintains, and it appears that he's right, was not involved in any of this other type of activity that Epstein was involved in. But Dershowitz was a well-known person, so he's tied into that same social scene. And so you could use the leverage of the fact that people know that they have really bad stuff into getting innocent people potentially smeared at the same time. So you would probably have this target list of people that he's trying to go after and hasn't gotten yet, and then you have the people that he's already gotten really good blackmail stuff on. Which also explains how he suddenly had all this money when he had no real background in finance or business before then. He just suddenly became an unknown college professor that becomes if not a billionaire, he at least pretended to be a billionaire with all these just creepy, weird backgrounds. And obviously, if there's a lot of child porn there, you're not going to want to release it, but you sure as heck should be identifying who the people are in those videos with those kids. And there's no reason not to go as public as you can about the truth that you're uncovering. Or if you're just going to simply use that blackmail information to continue and hold it above those people's heads, then just come out and say, we found that this information is so sweet and awesome that we're going to use it to push our agenda, and regardless, and we'll let our secret, our CIA use it or something against people. This whole thing, and I'm really curious to see what Dan Bongino does in there at the FBI. I have a lot of respect for him, actually. So, I am very curious, especially with that video they released. Like, I saw the video and nobody went in there. Number one, somebody that could have killed him would have been already in the prison past where that video was recording. But secondly, the video is obviously, it's not the original raw footage. They presented it out there as it was, and that was such an incompetent choice and decision. You can look at it, and if you look at the metadata, you can tell that it wasn't original video footage. It was obviously, it could have easily been edited the way that it was provided to the public. And those sorts of sloppy processes, and for all I know, there's bureaucrats within the whole system that are purposely trying to throw a lot of smoke and confusion into this so that they can discredit people that they don't like in government trying to do the right things. I mean, there's all kinds of double-cross sort of behavior that can be going on. But because of that, it keeps it in the news, and people will be talking about it. I realize sometimes some of this is a distraction, and some people are trying to believe that there's other things occurring to distract from the Epstein files. But, man, it's just a lot of unforced errors in this whole process in the Trump administration. Jason Fisher, question, can we do an open records on status of the gun training courses and software applications being, are they going to pull a high school and start doing it at the last second? Well, incompetence is the default ocean in which government swims. And so I would always expect the most incompetent choice as being the primary preferred choice of government at almost all times. So if the stupidest thing and most incompetent thing is to wait and do it at the last second, that's what they'll plan on doing. And so you're pretty safe to bet that way. You almost always get it right if you do. That's what I'd kind of expect. Let's see. Gas prices. Oh, sorry about this. I think that was funny. I just did Jason's question here. I'm not sure, Jack, if I had dealt with this question, so sorry, I might have skipped it there. Jack Palder has a question here. Gas has gone up, and yes, it has. Groceries took a big jump in the last week. Property taxes are reaching to the sky. And when it comes to Washington State, I'm really tired of winning. Yeah, I mean, the gas going up is clearly and primarily the result of both the CCA, which is the Climate Commitment Act scam, the kickbacks that are collected at the wholesale level. You don't actually see them reflected in the gas tax, even though it's essentially a gas tax that you're getting there. That one big scam is probably the biggest increase you're seeing there, proportionate to other states. And then, of course, there was the additional bonus tax increase that occurred over the July 4th weekend. I think it was shortly after that. And that is a small tax increase, but it's every dime or every nickel that you're adding to the gas tax really adds up over time. Washington State, believe it or not, isn't higher than California, but they certainly, why compare yourself to the biggest clown show in America? You don't have to be as bad or as incompetent as somebody else. And of course, Bob Ferguson's always viewed himself as like the mini-me to Gavin Newsom. And so it's kind of been his idol. It really appears that he assigns a lot of political value to Newsom and wants to be just like him. And the governance of Washington State is obviously incompetent at best and corrupt at worst. It really just depends, like I said, the definition of bureaucracy in Washington State, but it's not just here, it's really pretty much anywhere, is mountains of corruption that are concealed by an ocean of incompetence. There might be fish swimming in there doing good things, but mostly it's an ocean of incompetence. Finding the corruption's a little hard because you have to swim down there to those mountains, but incompetence is the default position, and corruption, it conceals a lot of. The number one defense when you catch politicians and bureaucrats stealing money or committing fraud or doing anything else, they always try to roll into, I'm not corrupt, and I'm just an incompetent clown. And that's a very believable defense if you've ever had any interaction with government. And most people believe government's incompetent because they've had interactions with them. So the differentiation and drawing the distinction between where corruption ends and incompetence begins can actually be very difficult. And so muddying up those waters is what government likes to do as much as they can. They don't mind being called incompetent. It's a badge of honor for them, but the challenge is trying to distinguish between those. Gas going up, though, is an egregious policy choice that Washington State's decided to do. I haven't noticed the big changes in the grocery prices as much, so I'm interested in seeing where you're seeing those price increases. The big price increase I noticed in groceries was over the last 4 or 5 years, but essentially you've got inflation challenge where over the last 10 years, inflation has been about 35%. Cumulative inflation over 10 years. So now that's shocking when you compare it to previous time periods outside of the 1970s and early 80s. And so that's a pretty big impact, and it's hard to avoid recognizing the fact that our costs have gone up on everything. But then we also have the complication where distinguishing between the inflation impact, which is a federal failing at a pretty significant level, and distinguishing between that and local governance stupidity with their taxes and how they squander and waste whatever resources they do get from us and never hold themselves to account. They just simply want to get more and more cash so that just like some kind of bratty child that squanders the money you give them, and then they just simply want more. That's essentially the way government operates, and nobody's told them no. That is something that we should do as citizens, and why we need different political people in there. Not because there's some kind of political solution at the end of the day because you elect a Republican, but because you have to get rid of the governing class in our state that exists today. They will not reform themselves under any scenario. They won't do the right thing. That's not who they are. And replacing them with people who are willing to actually cut the government down, eliminate taxes, stuff like that, that's a big deal. Let's go down here. There was another question here. Oh, there's a lot of questions here, so I'm going to try to keep getting to these questions here. Michael Case, this ferry issue has to be something else. Ferguson could have given any of the local shipyards a tax credit like what was was given to Boeing if he wanted business to stay here. That's true. I mean, it's also a little ironic and odd that he picked Florida as the state that he could build a ferry there cheaper and bring it through the Panama Canal and deliver it to Washington by, a huge amount. I don't remember the number now, but it was a lot. And, when ferries are costing $330 million a piece, that's really expensive. And we've been building ferries out here for a long time. Now, obviously, going down the yellow brick road of total electrification and the compounding problem that creates for us in a state that has decided to go and ignore the fact that we're in northern latitude and have a lot of clouds, and then pretend that somehow windmills and solar are going to solve all our problems, and hostility even to hydro, which is our dominant source of power in Washington state. Baseload power is largely hydro. And then hostility towards obviously shutting down the last TransAlta, the coal-fired plant. And rather than replacing it with a natural gas plant, there's a level of stupidity when it comes to this that obviously if people were rational, they wouldn't be Democrats, and they certainly wouldn't be in government. But we have to deal with some of these issues and address them moving forward. So, Graphics Guru, predictions for the midterms. What do you think the Trump administration has to get done before then in order to win in the midterms? Election reform is number one. It may not affect every state the same way, but election reform is the primary and absolutely mandatory requirement that the Trump administration has to do that I'm not seeing enough progress on at all so far. And that's because there's a lot of problems in the election systems. I've got an endless series of articles and videos I've done on this in the past. If you've ever heard me speak about some of these issues, you know what I'm talking about. Mostly in election roll issues. The fact the Department of Licensing here is a terrible organization, corrupt to its core, and they register every non-U.S. citizen to vote that ever comes their way. And it's not clear how many yet there are, but hopefully with the Homeland Security list being made made public soon. We can start to get to that. Anyway, we'll just see. There's just a massive, that's one issue. Second issue is he has to deliver on the immigration issue. One of the issues that he actually seems to have made the most progress on, the funny thing about that, a little bit to me, is, and it's funny in just more of a political science kind of marketing way, the left has attacked the Trump administration relentlessly over deporting violent felons and criminals and sex traffickers and all these other people. And removing the worst of the worst first is a good it's actually good public policy, and it's also a good political narrative. I mean, it's something that people understand, relate to. Nobody really wants these, other than Democrats. Nobody really wants these violent felons or criminals in the community, regardless of origin. And the ability to remove them like that and send them back to their country of origin is certainly a good policy. I actually think that it's going to be one of these issues that becomes a defining part of the Trump administration. And it really was, if you heard his first opening speech in 2015 when he came down the elevator, it was something that he was aware of and focused on and probably got him the most attention back then. So the left, for some reason, I don't know where they think this is coming from, they think attacking him on that issue and that policy is going to somehow improve their base, and I just don't think it does. However, there's a clear and obvious concern about political power that comes from the motivation for them to attack him. They clearly believe that they really need these violent criminal felons that are not U.S. citizens in the country to build up a census or voting or future voter sort of base. They seem to believe that that's absolutely true. And they might be right in their theory, but the desperation and attention and meltdowns and TDS syndrome that they're demonstrating and pushing back on it only seems to draw attention to a policy that's actually quite popular in America, and that's going to do nothing but help the Trump administration. What will hurt the Trump administration by the midterms is if they get America into what appears to be a long war going nowhere again. Now, people are sick of nation building, and they want a strong military, but they don't want to be involved in endless and ridiculous wars in places that don't really matter to America in some immediate, tangible way. So I think if they get into a war before then, I think the Trump administration's potentially going to be at risk. And clearly there's going to be an economic downturn. If there's a big economic downturn caused either because of the inevitable recognition that we are not controlling our debt and not reducing the cost of governance and not getting things under control with the deep state or the government bloat, and if at some point in time one of those two things hits, or both of them, by the midterms, I think that's going to hurt the Trump administration, and that would result in damage to the Republican brand downstream. But if he can stay away from those two issues mostly and have an economy that's at least limping along, if not doing well, and make progress clearly on the immigration and start to show movement and downsizing the government, to some extent you're blessed with the enemies you have. The left has just become mouth-foaming crazy in a way that I think pushes people away entirely from their agenda or supporting them, because there's only so much crazy people want to be around, and so much drama and so much chaos. And the demographic shifts in voting patterns in America isn't because the Republicans have just suddenly been so awesome and created and improved their brand and their marketing geniuses. I don't believe that to be true. What's really happened is that the Democrats have melted down on such an epic and weird, esoteric kind of bizarre way. They can't define what a woman is. They like watching girls get beat up in sports. They support fraud at its purest, unvarnished sort of form. They defend violent sex traffickers in America and want to keep them here as U.S. citizens and claim that they're really important people to keep here. I don't think that that's a winning goal, but more power to the Democrats to keep going that way. It would be substantially beneficial for those of us who want a smaller and more limited government if we elected good, small government sort of focused Republicans in there rather than, big government Republicans or Democrats, either way. So we'll have to see. Listen, we're a little early on the midterms for me to be able to predict, but you have one of two outcomes there, really. And if he does pick up a number of seats in the House and the Senate at the federal level, particularly in the Senate, especially if for some miracle they're able to get beyond like a filibuster proof, so above 60 seats in the Senate, which is probably a stretch, but nevertheless, if you could get something like that, you could really genuinely push on a more limited government moving forward. And as much as I find there's a lot of good reason to be doubtful that anybody in the political class of either party really want to downsize government or reduce the power that it has, there does seem to be a willingness to, in the Trump administration, as it's currently formed, to take on the deep state and to have that fight overturning the Chevron defense in the Supreme Court. A series of Supreme Court decisions that were brought helpfully by the left to the Supreme Court in their attack and attempt to prevent Trump from firing workers, cutting off USAID, or all these other things. That's actually, most of those decisions, not all of them, but most of them have actually shifted the power away from the bureaucracy, which is, if you're familiar with the nature of the imperial bureaucracy concerns, which I've had, then that's probably a good thing, and we'll see where it goes. Gosh, sorry. T.Z. Burton making a prediction, not asking a question here. Island County case will not get overturned. Sadly, he's going to jail, not with a judicial system like the Democrat-only court system. Could be, but let's just see what happens. I do think there is a certain point in time when the absurdity eventually can be illustrated well enough that maybe that can be changed. Jason Fisher, question, what's your thoughts on California high-speed rail? Very fancy YouTube channel, apparently won't be complete until 2050, and won't it all be outdated by then? That's a great question. I think the one thing to remember, the California light rail, high-speed rail, right, the fake rail, that may be actually one of the more classic cases that gets studied moving forward about how the goals of a bureaucracy are absolutely not to achieve any objective. The goals of a bureaucracy are mostly to incentivize failure and make sure that you never fix anything, because that's the only way to ensure the growth and bloat of your bureaucracy, especially if you've insulated yourself from consequences, either through political alignment or bribing enough people to want to stay on the gravy train all the way into the abyss. And that's essentially what the light rail in California, the high-speed rail, the fake rail, the rail to nowhere system, is really become. And when they have a fancy YouTube channel and website and promotional tours, it's all about the narrative. I mean, this is the one thing. I don't think people understand this so much, but when you're fighting against massive bureaucracy or the bloat of the state or something like that, they don't care about you filing 100 lawsuits or talking about unconstitutional issues or anything like that. But they absolutely are terrified when their narrative gets challenged and exposed. It's the one thing, it matters more to them than anything else. And you don't have to believe me, just look at the emails and how they discuss issues out there. They'll even go, I've had emails where chains between bureaucrats, when they're so worried about their clearly fragile house of cards sort of narrative that they're pushing, that they'll even go down to like some obscure blogger in one corner of the state that actually had a post questioning it in some limited way, and they're so concerned about it, they'll write whole articles and presentations to each other about it, trying to retain the narrative to keep up the house of cards. The benefit that represents to you and I, if we care about liberty and freedom and we want to actually change the direction the government and the size the state really is headed in, is all we have to do to make that initial step to move the needle and start pushing forward is to expose the corruption and the truth about what is actually going on with government. And the more people actually become aware of that, the harder it is to push that fake narrative. And this is why censorship is such a high priority for people like Bob Ferguson, or for the Democrats in general. They have universally endorsed kind of the censorship industrial complex. That is their highest priority, is to be able to censor you and I and any alternative news. And this is particularly true when you see the total collapse of whatever's left of the mainstream media that's not really allowed to commit active journalism any longer. Their objective is mostly to create and support the narrative the Democrats have given them, or the left in general have given them over the last 20 years in particular. You've really seen it grow that way. Well, now suddenly, if there's all these upstart alternatives spreading different stories and exposing the truth about things, that it becomes harder and harder to pretend like the emperor doesn't have any clothes, then the ability to maintain momentum and convince a bunch of sleepy people that are stuck going to the casino or looking at their phone or checked out of society or worried about the kids' soccer practice next week or whatever, that they suddenly start to wake up, and it actually reaches those people that don't pay attention to any news generally, but they're starting to hear and find out just how bad things are. That's how you get people like Trump elected. That's how you start to change the political direction. They know it. That's why narrative control and protection is one of their highest priorities. And this California light rail to nowhere is got to be one of the things that just has to stand out. I mean, the feds should not give another penny to that project. Cutting it off, it just puts it out of its misery sooner. What do you feel is, this is Thunder Designer again, what do you feel is a long-term plan for the U.S. if everything went according to plan? Is it a 50-year ideal plan? I don't believe in the plan. Central planning is a failure by design. Government doesn't truly function that way. I don't care what a bunch of clowns in government and high-paid consultants seem to think is going to happen. Every prediction they ever have is pretty much always wrong. They do get paid really good money, though, to do that, and you certainly don't want to adjust your life based on those predictions. Short-term predictions are fine. Planning for basic normal things, it's okay, but you can't hand your future over to some kind of central planning scheme. I do like the idea that when, just like any of us do in our lives, is we come up with a scenario selection and we think, well, how are we going to plan in our life, or how are we going to make these improvements in our house? How are we going to fix our career? How are we going to help our kids be more prepared for college or career path? Or what's my plan to deal with my car as the inevitable maintenance requirements are going to pile up? That type of planning is pretty reasonable and predictive. But when you take macro planning of a country, whatever group that you've handed that planning scheme to, all you know is they're going to be corrupted by something for alternative motives, usually, so that they can basically push whatever gravy train kickback scheme they plan on having. This isn't even a conspiracy. It's just the way human nature works. And if you understand bureaucracy, you begin to understand exactly how all this stuff tends to come together. Okay, Thunder Designer, great to know that that's your new name. 5 Acre Farmer, in your opinion, does it seem that P. Trump has changed his goal for America? Do you mean Donald Trump? Or are a bunch of us looking for something? I don't know. I mean, listen, I'm not a cult of personality guy when it comes to politicians. I don't care whether it's Trump or Reagan, Obama, or whoever. I think it's always a mistake to put your faith in a politician and presume that somehow they're worthy of it. I think you support the policies and agendas that they're doing that align with your belief system, and you help and implement them, and you oppose the policies that don't. And obviously, the issue related to challenges with what they you'll have times where you don't know, right? So you're going to decide, okay, I trust this person because the last 10 policies they pushed I've generally agreed with, so I'll give them credit for this until I learn otherwise. That's fair enough. It becomes very difficult. You can never be a truly, totally neutral in every way person because you have a belief system yourself, I hope. And that belief system, you're going to try to find those people who at least more closely align with it. What it means, though, is you can't have a purity test that's so perfect and pure that pretty much you're a party of one and you can't find anybody on the planet that agrees with everything that you agree with, and therefore you support nobody. It's not rational. There is a gradual sort of approach sometimes on some of this stuff. I'm going to look at liberty and freedom issues and say, between the two goofballs that are running for office, this guy's the closest to my belief system, or at least he's going to hurt me the least. That's who I want to get in. Sure, do I want somebody better? Yes, but that's not who's on the ballot, and that's how you move forward. There's a good question here I saw coming up here. Julie Anderson, you didn't use the We the Government, but luckily I saw this. And have you ever audited a Republican Party county office? And the answer is yes. I've actually done quite a few of them over the years. And some of them have been a mess, total mess, actually. So I've done quite a few of them. My main focus has generally been not political party offices specifically. It's mostly been on larger PACs or politicians. And in our state, the power players are universally Democrats across the board, every state office, all the judges, most county governance around the state, not all of them, and whether they have an R next to the name or D next to the names, and so it doesn't matter so much. But the truth is most of the power in our state, maybe 80-85% of it's dominated by Democrats. So if you're going to try to hold government accountable in this state, it's going to inevitably be people who have a D next to their name. If you live in South Dakota or North Dakota or Wyoming or Texas or Oklahoma, when you look at government and corruption in government, they're going to have an R next to their name. At least the elected officials there will. The one thing that they universally have, the scourge that is very difficult to fix, is the inevitability of bureaucracy, whether you're in a Republican or Democrat state. At least on the Republican side, there's a theoretical belief system, at least a home for shrinking the size of government. That home doesn't exist at all on the Democrat side, and so it's kind of an interesting difference. But if you think that just because a county party is formed and that just because they call themselves Republicans means they're doing a good job with their financing, nope, you're totally wrong. Some of them can be just as incompetent and corrupt as Democrats if you look into them closely enough. So, but if you have more specific questions, feel free to throw that in the mix too. TZ Burton here. The Netherlands has scrapped baseload energy for renewable wind solar. Now they are rationing electricity, and since Washington State's doing the same, what will happen here and when? The funny thing is, of all states doing this, we're probably one of the last states that will be directly impacted by it, only because we have the benefit, natural benefit, of hydropower, and provided we're not dumb enough to go down the yellow brick road of the green destruction agenda, which is pulling out dams, which isn't going to happen right now under the Trump administration, I'm aware. But holding on to those dams and improving the hydropower baseload that we have in our state gives us a substantial advantage over most other places in America. What we really need to do is focus, I think, on a bit more nuclear as an additional bonus, because that tends to go along quite well with both the structure that we have now, and I think the modern nuclear plants are substantially beneficial, both in efficiency and safety and just ability to maintain them over a long period of time. And so you probably need some kind of a mix like that. Wind power can work in some places, but it's a bonus electricity. It's not going to be something that you're really going to effectively use. And solar power has a lot of problems with it too, especially where we live in the Pacific Northwest. But fine, if you want to do it for your home property, I know people that have been able to turn their homesteads into independently powered, off-the-grid sort of places with their own power control that they use through solar and some wind sometimes. And so if they're able to do that, great. Obviously, you need baseload battery backup to deal with the times that you're not going to have, because they're more cyclical in how the power grid comes in, But that's just going to be something that you have to deal with. I actually think our state's generally positioned, as harmful and insane and crazy and bad as the political class and the bureaucrats that support them are here, we actually have a ways to go before we're in as much trouble as like Maryland, for example, and some of these other states that are suffering power breakdowns. Frankly, even Texas and their insanity with how they structured their power grid system that's led to some problems in the past. They may be able to fix that there in Texas, but they're in a lot worse shape than we are. Graphics Guru, do you believe Trump might be getting the bad decisions out of the way now so that next year he can lead more positive things because of America 250? Thoughts on that? I don't know. I mean, I think that if you survive a political assassination, I think your perspective on the world changes substantially. And if there's nothing that puts it into starker realization than that, I don't know what it would be. So to some extent, Trump is determining his agenda in 4 years, or his view for posterity, how people are going to view him in the next 4 years. And you can think that everybody's playing 4D chess. I don't buy it. That's not been my experience. I think there's a lot of impulsive and random stuff that happens because people are trying to deal with the crisis of the day, or the narratives that are changing, or the situations on the ground that aren't cooperating, or human nature of your allies and enemies, and all the other things that happen in politics. So we'll see. I do think that there was an effort to hit the ground running by the Trump administration that was very clearly evident. You can't deny that. Mostly based on the fact that he had had this experience 4 years ago. There's no way that if Trump had won in 20, or I should say been able to take the 8 years consecutively, that he would be nearly as capable as he is coming in right now this cycle. That 4-year downtime really gave him this ability to do a lot of homework and organize teams and have some experiences that completely led to a much more competent launch of a presidential governing structure than what we've seen in the past. He also is fortunate that he doesn't have to fight the Republican in the Senate and the House as much. He still does, but not to the same degree that he used to, and that he did in the first cycle. And he also doesn't have the same naive belief that that the bureaucracy is going to actually respond to the president in the same way. I mean, you can just see a lot of lessons learned in what's being implemented here. It's a highly unusual thing from a political science perspective if you have a academic kind of wonkish perspective on this thing at all. This is really fascinating stuff going on here, regardless of the significance, the importance of these decisions, and the fact that I want a smaller, more limited government, and I want to have this rescission package go through, and I want to see pocket rescissions coming in August, and I want to see hundreds of billions of dollars, if not $1 trillion or $2 trillion, cut out of the federal budget as soon as possible. All these things are good, and that's really what I want to see, because if I can see that trajectory occur, where America's not bloating this budget into this parabolic curve of impossible to ever repay debt, but actually see that curve start going the other direction, I'm going to support that and try to move that in the right direction. So we'll see where that goes, and hopefully that's where he's headed. Let's see. I'm trying to get some questions here. TZ Burton again. Guys, when you're making comments, that's no problem, but I'm trying to get to questions. So mostly, ICE is doing a lot of raids in blue states. I noticed Sideshow Bob and the mayor of Seattle are very quiet. And are we executing ICE raids here? Yes, we are, by the hundreds. People are being arrested and deported all the time in Washington state, just like they are elsewhere. It is very wise, politically wise, as far as I can tell, to see that Bob Ferguson and some of the Democrats in senior political positions in the state aren't going as crazy, openly crazy, as some of these Democrats are in other states. And that's a wise political move on their part, because they're not getting more attention focused on them because of it. They're still happening. You can still see them going on right now, but they're also they're looking at what's happening in California and New York and Massachusetts, some of these other places. And I think they're just wisely sitting back thinking they can bide their time a little bit, and maybe Trump will ignore them. And so far, that's been a pretty smart approach. It's not what I want to see going forward for a variety of other reasons, but that's what they're doing right now. How can the U.S. catch up on China and energy, especially with AI in mind? What are the current energy levels, and how do we push the Senate to expand energy production? Well, mostly what I would say is I'm not so concerned about catching up to China in energy at all, actually. I mean, energy, China is mainly doing this with coal-fired power plants, right? So that's their biggest thing. And they're just simply approaching the lowest cost, most practical way they have of producing power. And their power needs are actually greater than ours, substantially better, harder, and they have a much steeper path to go to get there. But they're getting there. I don't think we need to catch up. China's trying to catch up to us. The question is, are we going to self-destruct, or are we willing to take it to a more realistic, practical approach to looking at baseload power and abandoning esoteric sort of interesting things that I care about from a science and technical wonkish sort of standpoint, but things that just don't work on a macro scale for providing consistent power in a modern society. And the AI data centers, we'll have to see. I do think there's a lot of hype around AI that I can't. I'm super skeptical. I've been through this plenty of times in my life, and so have you if you're watching my channel, most likely, that there's a substantial level of, there's a tendency to create these agendas that everyone wants to jump on as some kind of a guarantee of the future, and I don't think they know it as well as they say they do. So, but that just might be the conservative in me coming out of it. Let's see. Bobby Ferguson is the Emperor's New Clothes. Yeah, that's funny. Let's see. What do I think? Mind blown watcher. What do you think about the honor killing trial? Dude is guilty. Wonder what the wife will get. Yeah, that's a good question. I mean, this has been a cultural conflict in America for a while. When you get people who come from other cultures who believe that it's perfectly okay to murder their children if they back out of arranged marriages, or they have done something else that brings negative honor. Obviously, in America, you should not be killing people, but that's really what they're exposing this in this kind of a situation is a big deal. So anyway, we'll see what happens. had a second question related to this, and I'll post it up here, which is not sure the legal status, but I bet asylum from Iraq, since that's where they were trying to sell her to. Lots of foreign immigrants in Washington even beat out California for number moving here. Well, I don't think so. I don't. California, people just don't realize how much larger California is to Washington. California still probably takes a cake on illegal immigrants. Not that we probably don't have our fair share. We don't need to be importing more illegal criminals here. We have plenty of our own. We homegrown plenty of criminals in our state. But we'll have to see as some of the ICE deportation numbers get more public as time goes by. But I don't know. I do need to check in on that trial. So I've been hearing about it, but I haven't really talked about it a lot. So I want to dig into that one a little bit more before I can speak on it a little bit more intelligently. Graphics Guru, thoughts on abolishment of the Federal Reserve and basically usury. Well, I mean, interest is fine for debt, but I'm going to tell you the Federal Reserve should absolutely be abolished. I think it's not a good thing. And the lack of transparency and debasement of the currency that inevitably occurs, I'm sure that politicians love it. That is why, and so do people who are willing to arbitrage their future and business opportunities and leverage it, and it probably provides them insider deals and opportunities that we wouldn't get otherwise. But I think it sets us up for a lot of damage and harm, and it has already, and I don't support the Federal Reserve at all. Let's see. If Trump, might be my last question here of the evening here, if Trump keeps up the good work he's doing and keeps making gains with young voters and Hispanics, could we see a similar election result to a 2008 or 1990s? Possibly. And actually, the 1990s would be more closely affiliated with it. But remember, the difference in the 1994 election was that Clinton was elected in 1992, and there was a majority of Democrats in the legislature at the time. So really, it was a more extreme event in 1994 and 2008, or I don't think it was 2008. It was 2010 that was against the incumbent presidency party. And so, if anything, those would signal that the Republicans should lose seats in the House and the Senate. This is a weird time, though. I don't think that's actually going to happen. So we'll have to see. And we'll find out. Let's see. My Seattle Times article is what you're saying from January. Washington sees shift in where new residents are moving from. But the number of new licenses to people from other countries surged in 2019. There were only 10,000 issued, and last year the total was nearly 23,000, 826% increase. I'm going to go back and look at that. If that's really an article and they really said that, I'd like to know how they get that information, because that is information that's not revealed to the public. And what that means is that all of those people are actually getting registered to vote, because our Department of Licensing registers everybody that gets a driver's license to vote, whether they're a citizen or not. They'll deny it, but that's what happens, and we all know it's happening, because anybody that's been around anybody that's not a U.S. citizen gets their voting ballot. They get their ballots, so it's they may not vote on it, and they may not be doing it, but that's what they do. And so I'm very fascinated to see that, but we will see. Here's another last question. Average Geek Joe, did you see that I filed a PC complaint against Governor Ferguson? Complaint number 174537. I didn't, but I'll like to look it up. I'll definitely look it up and see how you did it. And maybe if I get a chance at the next live stream, I'll give you critique on what you did there. So I'm very happy to hear that you did that. And more people should do that. It's a lot of fun to get involved in filing PDC complaints, doing the research and filing good ones. So with that, guys, it is I'm a little later than I normally try to shoot for a live stream tonight. Thank you guys for joining me on a beautiful day in July. And if you like what you see here, feel free to leave comments down below, because it's too late to leave a question right now. I try to go back and look at my comments as well and respond to any of those that are actually questions. So hope you guys are all doing well. I do expect next Tuesday to be on the same time frame. One of these days I'll give you an update on where I'm at with getting a new studio up and running. Things are going to look quite a bit different here starting before too long. I'm going to have kind of this interim process of studio video work where I think I can increase the volume in kind of this mid studio structure, and you'll be able to see the difference quite significantly when it happens. And then hopefully get to the point before too long where I actually have my own studio where I have a lot more control and I'll be a lot more responsive and have a lot better volume, I think, coming out, and be able to deal with a lot issues in a much more timely manner than I'm able to do today. So with that, thank you guys so much for watching. And if you're one of the many people who've come up to me in public as I've run into you around the state and introduce yourself to me, I really appreciate that. I like getting feedback and seeing people. Obviously, you know me, I don't know you, so coming up and introducing yourself is a good way for me to at least get to know some of the viewers of this channel and people who watch things like this live stream every day. So hope all's well. We'll talk to you. See you next week. And I hope you like the videos that I'm putting out. I got a video coming out here about a bunch of fraudsters that have been caught for good stories recently in Washington State and government, and just kind of a Doge Washington ideas on how to improve how you look at local government. Just remember, if you want to do that, you're going to have to be willing to show up, because the future does belong to those who show up. Thank you guys for watching.